I think it's so funny that our men's group, which meets on Monday morning, and we're going to close with a quote from somebody from our men's group from Texas. Phil Burtis, who leads the group when I'm not there, said, "How are we going to spend 4 whole weeks on this little story?" And I said, "We could do 4 months on this story. There's so much, and it's just packed into the story. So many life lessons, so much reality, so much of what we go through. You could almost say that life is Jonah 2.0. We go through the same stuff. God leads us in all kinds of ways that we don't understand, and we have to learn through it. Who learns more from challenging stuff than from easy stuff? It's not the easy stuff that we learn from. If I'm sitting in a lazy boy eating donuts, watching YouTube videos on how to fix a car, which is my happy place, I'm not growing much. Space? Yeah, space, there's space rockets and stuff. That's fun to watch too. I'm not learning a lot. I need to be pushed. I need to be stretched. I think that one of our biggest challenges as a culture is we've become so comfortable all the time. Jeff brought that up in our group this morning. We're so comfortable all the time that we sort of get into the habit of just always seeking that comfortable, happy, friendly spot, and we end up not growing like our grandparents did and great-grandparents. I think of the generation that grew up in the Great Depression and had to go hit the beach at Normandy. Whoa. Talk about stretched for 19-year-olds when they had to go out and do this kind of stuff, and came back and built virtually everything we see around us. It's a fantastic thing to be stretched, even though we often don't seek it out. So we're looking at Jonah. We're on chapter 4. Where we left off was that he said, okay, I'll go to Nineveh. God said, go to Nineveh, preach to the Ninevites, and tell them they're in big trouble. Now, Jonah didn't much like the Ninevites because the Ninevites gave him an enemy. It's always easier to define ourselves against something than what we're for. It's always easier to have that enemy. If you're a leader of a country and things start to kind of get fragmented and divided, they often do what's called Wag the Dog, which means to create an enemy and pull everyone together. If we could just create an Ayatollah or a Russian communist or, Osama bin Laden, we'd pull everyone together if we have an enemy. And leaders have been doing that for a long, long time because you can pull people together if you can get them to hate an enemy. And for the Jewish people, the Assyrian Empire, capitaled in Nineveh, was the enemy. And it's always nice to have an enemy because you can always blame everything on your enemy. Things are really bad because of the enemy. Things are really bad because of what they're doing. And Jonah was very comfortable with that. It's always nice to have that boogeyman to blame everything on. So he goes to Nineveh, and he says, you guys are in big trouble. And the Ninevites said, yeah, we know that. We've got problems here. We are a state, a nation, built on coercion, on force. And we know, in the long run, that force is not sustainable. We can't keep this up forever. You can't make people do things indefinitely. Eventually, they start to rebel. And there's murmurings and all kinds of things going on. And the truth is, Assyria was about to fall. Very soon after this happened, it did fall. And they realized something was going on. They said, you're right. We need to turn around. We need to quit bullying our neighbors. Isn't that an interesting thing that we see in the news right now? People bullying their neighbors. That's just sort of what happens in the world stage. People invading countries right next to them. And that's what they did for a living. They would invade these countries, live off of these countries, and force them to follow their ways. It doesn't work long term. And it was about to come undone. And so Jonah says, cut it out. They said, well, we probably should. And at least for a few generations, they did. And things started to stabilize, and they started to behave themselves. But that's not what Jonah wanted, because he wanted to have an enemy. I don't want to turn these people around. Then who are we? Who are we, the Jewish people, if we don't have somebody to blame for everything? If we don't have that boogeyman, that bête noire, that thing we always fight against. So today is part 4, where we find out that Jonah is not very happy with the fact that they turned around, and the Lord said, all right, I won't destroy the city. I will bless you folks, and we'll see what you can do. Like a good parent, when the kid actually turns around. Doesn't just say sorry because they want to avoid the problem. They really see the problem, and they're starting to turn around. Jonah Chapter 4. The ball is in our court. We're going to go verse by verse through Chapter 4 because it's very thick stuff. And this is the last chapter in Jonah, and it doesn't have an ending. And oh, was I frustrated the other night. Wendy and I watched a movie called The Photograph. Beautiful Bollywood movie. We love to watch movies from India. I don't know why that is, but there's lots of dancing, and there's lots of fun stuff, and there's usually a romance in there and the whole deal. And they're always kind of G-rated, and it's just fun to watch Bollywood movies. They're very colorful. And this was so beautifully shot, and these great developed characters, and all the tension in India between all the different castes because they came from different social levels. And it was marvelous. It was coming along, and then it didn't end. We don't know what happened to them, the couple. We don't know. And all of a sudden the credits start going. And I was so mad. I thought, I've been robbed. I gave this movie 2 hours of my life, and look what happened. Yeah, if there ever will be one. So it was just so frustrating. And this is the book of Jonah. It doesn't have an ending. It leaves it up in the air. Because guess what? Your life doesn't have an ending scripted out yet either. And it's up to you and me as to how we're going to write that story with God. Are we going to be able to go where he leads us and do the kind of things that he has us do, go on that big adventure of life? And you might think, I'm too old to have an adventure. I just want to coast. And the older we get, the more we're tempted to do that. But we have a lot of young people here. And young people, you got decades ahead of you. And how you write that narrative is really important that you get intentional about that. And how you're going to interpret what goes on. So let's look at Jonah. Jonah 4. Verses 1 through 4, the beginning of the chapter, the beginning of the end that doesn't have an end. This change of plans greatly upset Jonah, and he became very angry because the Ninevites had repented, and God says, well, then I won't destroy the city. If they're going to quit this coercive stuff, then more power to them. Jonah did not want that at all. Jonah wanted them to go down, or at least to be able to keep blaming them. Verse 2. So he complained to the Lord. Wah, wah, wah. No, it doesn't say that in Hebrew, but he complained to the Lord about it. Didn't I say before I left home that you would do this, Lord? That is why I ran away to Tarshish. I knew that you are merciful and compassionate God, slow to get angry, and filled with unfailing love. You are eager to turn back from destroying people. Just kill me now, Lord. I'd rather be dead than alive if what I predicted will not happen. He predicted that the city was going down because of all the stuff they were doing to their neighbors and to their own citizens. And they turned from it. And God said, great. And he didn't like that at all because God took away his enemy. God took away his boogeyman. God took away, it's almost like America needs one too, like we need a boogeyman. If it's not the communists, it's got to be the Muslims. If it's not the Muslims, it's got to be the Chinese. It's got to be somebody. We got to have somebody to hate that'll somehow pull us together. The Lord replied, is it right to be angry about this? Is it right for you to be upset about this? It's so interesting how God asks more questions of us than gives us statements. Jesus asks over 300 questions in the New Testament and makes very few statements. He's probing to get us to think. Just telling us what to do and doing it, robots can do that, monkeys can do that. But making us think about what it is that's right and wrong is a real key. So the ball's back in Jonah's court. Sulking is not attractive. Who would love to frame a picture of your child or grandchild sulking and put it up on your desk? Nobody. It's not attractive for kids, and it's way less attractive for adults. It's just not something you want to project out into the world. Sulking is not something people want to be around. One of my biggest challenges with helping people learn how to pray is that they often are stuck in what I call victim prayer. Oh, my life stinks. Oh, it's happened to me. Oh, it's not fair. Oh, my kids don't listen to me. Oh, my parents are unfair. Oh, the system is awful. Oh, I hate the government. Oh, fill in the blank. And it's easy to slip into that. As you age, and all of you are aging at the same speed, by the way, and as I age, we have a choice. We start out as grape juice, and we can end up being vinegar, which comes from grape juice, or Chateau Lafite 1945, which is worth a lot. It's how we age that matters. And we get to decide how we're going to respond to our circumstances. We have no control over our circumstances, but we have total control over how we respond to our circumstances. Our response is where our freedom is. We're wearing all these things about freedom, everything else, and freedom is in our response. We can't control history, but we certainly can control how we respond to it. And Jonah is the worst responder ever. He's the person you don't want to be like. Do not be like Jonah. Nobody gets to the end of the book of Jonah and says, I just wish I could have the spirit of Jonah in my heart. Nobody says that. Everybody says, what an idiot. How do I avoid being like him? How do I not be Jonah? What's amazing to me is people name their kids Jonah, which is bizarre. It's just, if some of you have, I'm sorry, but not a great name. There's a lot of Bible names you should avoid. Ananias and Sapphira, Judas, just don't do that. I once used Judas as an illustration, and somebody says, I've got a cousin named Judas. Oh, sorry. Sulking is not adult behavior. Victim prayer, complaining in God's general direction. A lot of our prayer is just complaining in God's general direction. I've done way too much sulking prayer with God over 2 or 3 certain issues, which are continuous in my life. Sulk, sulk, sulk. And God can't do anything. God responds to our faith and what we want to do. God said, well, what do you want me to do about it? Give me something to start with. And I can't start with sulking. Is your situation real? Yes. Is there pain? Yes. In fact, there's legitimate ways to express negative emotion to God. It's called a lament. These are the kind of prayers I just came up with on the top of my head in the Bible. Laments are very common in the Bible, where people lament what has happened to them. But lamenting is not unattractive like sulking. Jesus says on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's lament. King David had lots of laments in the Bible. And he worked his way to faith by the end of each psalm he was writing. And he realized this situation is real. The circumstances are bad. And I don't like it, Lord, and I'm in pain. And I'm going to move in the direction of creating a positive narrative and way forward from this. And that's what the Psalms are about. Because he gets to write his own narrative. And so do we. You can't control your circumstances, but you can totally control the narrative you write about them. And if we have like 5 chapters of sulking in your narrative, you get to people. We just did a memorial service for Tamara's mom. She was 92 and a half. She lived a great life, and she made some really good choices, picking people over advancement and prestige. And all the young people who loved her were there, and they gathered around the casket afterwards. That's a life well lived. She wrote the narrative. She wrote the narrative of her life, and there are plenty of things in her life went wrong, but that wasn't the narrative. And she didn't ignore them. She wasn't in denial. Those issues were real, but there was something good there. Praise, praising God. Thanksgiving, that's another kind of prayer. Confession, saying, Lord, I messed up. Supplication, asking God for things. Fancy Latin word for asking God for things. Intercession, praying for others and for other situations. And Tamara's over there right now preaching at the Methodist Church, and she's got some of her best friends in there interceding for her because she's got a challenging job to preach in a challenging situation where their church is very much threatened with its survival. And she's trying to bring hope to them, and she's got some intercessors there praying for her, which I think is a fantastic idea. Some wellies are over there praying for her right now. And we need to be doing those things. So there's lots of different kinds of prayers: laments, praise, thanksgiving, confession, supplication, intercession, but sulking isn't one of them. Sulking, as we showed in the last slide, is not attractive adult behavior, and it's not even attractive with kids, and it's exactly what Jonah was doing. It seems like we have a primal need to hate and have an enemy. I've already covered that, so I'm not going to go into this in great detail. But those of us with a poor self-image, we grab an enemy and say, I'm not like that. Church denominations do this all the time. Oh, we're the good group of Christians and the other ones are the bad ones. What I love about the Alpha Course and Nikki Gumbel is they do lots of testimonies, but they do not allow you to put down other denominations or even mention them in your testimonies. I used to be a Lutheran, but now I'm saved. I mean, that's ridiculous. We don't want to be saying stuff like that. Or people say, well, I was Catholic, but now I'm a Christian. I'm thinking, there's lots of Christians in the Catholic Church. The denominational name on the building means nothing. If a person's worshiping God in spirit and in truth and the word is preached, good things can happen in every denomination. But it seems like, you know what I think would bring revival to the church? If all the pastors got raptured and just left. I really think it would be good, because pastors whip up these theological fights with each other. And they're ridiculous, splitting hairs theologically with each other. You should look at pastors' Facebook pages. Oh my goodness, they'll fight over any little thing. Things that don't matter to God at all. What size of communion cup should we use? That kind of thing. They just go on and on and on. And they make every other Christian turn out to be some kind of enemy. I think pastors were to leave the planet, I think the church would go into revival, because there's this bickering that goes on among highly educated pastors that drives me absolutely nuts. But it's almost that need to have an enemy. And if you have a need to have an enemy, perhaps you need to look at your own self-esteem and look at yourself and ask yourself, who am I? Not what am I against, but who am I? What am I positively? What did God create me to be? Weak people need enemies. People who want to be strong don't need enemies because they know who they are. They're self-actualized. And you go to higher levels of pastors, I mean really great leaders like Jack Hayford, you criticize another pastor around him and he'll come down on you. He'll come down on you. I was with Jack Hayford once, and somebody was complaining about Fred Price. Well, Fred Price, he just preaches that prosperity thing. I heard Jack Hayford said, you need to watch your language. He says, you live in South Central and realize that poverty is a curse, and he's trying to free them from that. You live in South Central like Fred Price has put his whole life into it, and you see what you'll be preaching. I think we get into these bickering things, which is just absolutely crazy, and it's not of the Lord. The body of Christ are all the people who follow Jesus in every place. And we ought to all be working together. Another thing about this story is, here's Jonah wishing he could die. And in chapter 2, he was praying that he would survive being swallowed by the fish. What a switch. He's, please, Lord, spare my life. I'll be good now. The fish spits him up, and soon enough, he forgets. One of the hardest things to remember some of the hardest things to remember in our lives are the miracles in our lives and the good things that happen to us. We tend to remember the bad things more than the good things. You lose sleep at night, it's probably over one of the bad things. Something you're ashamed of, something you're frustrated with, something you regret. And we often forget the miracles God gave us in our lives. The turning points where he showed up and rescued us from all kinds of things. Most all of us, if you get older, the Lord has done amazing things in your life. And you start, it's easy to forget them. Miracles are like dreams. Who here like me gets frustrated when you've got this dream and this insight and you want to bring that into your life, and then you wake up and you have Cheerios and it's gone? It just vanishes. You can't remember the dream at all. It just, poof, away it goes. And you had this fantastic insight that you really want to kind of integrate into your life, and it's just gone. Dreams and miracles are hard to remember. It's easier to remember the times where we had misfortune and where things went wrong, and we start to build our narrative of our life around the misfortune and not around the miracles. We end up not putting together a story that is faith-filled, but it's fear-filled. Let's go back to Jonah. Verse 5. Then Jonah went out to the east side of the city and made a shelter to sit under as he waited to see what would happen to the city. Went out to the east. Who's ever heard of the phrase orientation? Orientation, people with good orientation know what direction they're facing. We know that that's north. We know that that's south. I always like to know, I don't have to know where I am, but I have to know the directions. That's just one of those things I need to know, because then I can find my way out if I need to. North, south, east, and west. Why do we call it orientation? What does the word orient mean? The east. Before compasses, for hundreds and, well, for thousands of years, people oriented not around north, but around east. Because they'd ask themselves, okay, where am I? Oh, where did the sun come up this morning? Oh, it was over here. And they would orient themselves to the east. So orientation just means the ability to know where the sun came up. So you have a sense for where you are. So he goes to the east, because the sunrise is going to come up over his head. He's going to see the city, and he'll get the best view of what's going to be happening. And if you're kind of an orientation kind of person, you like to know where the sun comes up and where it goes down. See what would happen. And the Lord God arranged for a leafy plant to grow there, and soon it spread its broad leaves over Jonah's head, shading him from the sun. This eased his discomfort, and Jonah was very grateful for the plant. But God is never that simple, is he? But God also arranged for a worm the next morning at dawn. The worm ate through the stem and the plant of the plant so that it withered away. And as the sun grew hot, God arranged for a scorching east wind to blow on Jonah. Some people change when they see the light, others when they feel the heat. Carrots and sticks can work on our behavior. The sun beat down on his head until he grew faint and wished again to die. Death is certainly better than living like this, he exclaimed. People think that if people want to take their own life, it's okay. Well, it's not okay because it affects a lot of people. And second of all, usually when we're in that moment where we're thinking, I've thought about it once, and it's really a silly story. My wife flew to see her family, and I was alone and I didn't want to cook dinner. So I ate a box of bugles. Do you know what bugles are? There's those crunchy little things, and I usually have 4 or 5 of them, but I just ate the whole box. And I must have had the flu too or something, because I started throwing up. And there's nothing worse than throwing up bugles. I was just throwing up bugles in the bathroom, and one went through my nose, and it was just awful. It was just awful. And then the bugles were done, and I was doing dry heaves all night, and I couldn't get back to my bedroom because I kept throwing up. And so I was lying on the linoleum, and I remember my head rolling around on the linoleum. I said, Lord, take me now. I want to die. And I wasn't just kidding. If there had been a button to push, I would have pushed it. It's the only time in my life, but I would have pushed that button. And the last thing we want to do is let people die when they're feeling like that. That's just the worst thing ever. Can you imagine Wendy coming home and finding an empty box of bugles and a dead husband on the floor? We're not in our right mind when we make decisions like that. And we need to have people around us to help us through things like that. It's just such a very key thing. And the hot desert wind. I know that I'm weird. I like Santa Ana winds because they make the waves, the shapes better, so you can surf better. But most people don't like Santa Ana winds. And that's exactly what hit Jonah. This was a hot desert wind, like a blow dryer. And it came at him. You get these in Europe too. What's right south of Europe? The Sahara Desert. And with the Sahara Desert, when the wind comes from the south, it's a hot desert wind. They call it a Scirocco, and it's just like a Santa Ana wind. You could be sitting there in Germany, with all these, leafy trees and yodeling and all that stuff, and all of a sudden hot air comes over the mountains, and it's just like what we have. And it's not pleasant to be sitting there looking at the city, and you're upset by the fact that they've turned around, and the hot wind is coming right around you, and the whole deal is just a real mess. I love the faces Jackie Chan makes in his movies. It's like, God, what are you doing? What are you doing here? Because first you send the shade, and then you send the worm. If you are not confused by what God's doing in your life, you're not paying attention. Because God will do confusing things to us. If God just did things we understood, we wouldn't need a God because we would be God. We'd have it all figured out. But the truth is, stuff happens in life that we do not understand. And very often these things happen to us to help us learn something, to teach us something. God allows some things to happen. God didn't destroy the plant, the worm did, but he allowed this to happen. And here it went. And I think it's really important that we're honest with each other when we don't understand what God's doing. And we lament that, and we work through it with each other. Like I say, if you've never been in a situation where you were wondering what in the world God is doing with your life, you're not paying attention, because he does this to us all the time. Just like a good parent or a good coach or a good teacher, will take us out of our comfort zone from time to time where things don't make sense. Jonah 4, 9 through 11. But God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" "It is," he said, "and I'm so angry." Once again, twice in one chapter. I wish I was dead. I'm so angry. I'm hot and I'm bothered. I'm in a bad mood. I'm crabby. I'm cranky. I'm probably hangry too because there's no food out here. And the city is turned around and this is just all as bad as it can get. I may as well just die. But the Lord said, "You've been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and so many animals?" And next we read Jonah's response. But we don't, because it's not there. There is no chapter 5. And that's on purpose. We're supposed to ask ourselves, where are we with this story? Are we comfortable with God doing uncomfortable things with us? Are we able to respond better to our circumstances? Are we able to see a bigger picture? That's the thing that came out of our prayer meeting this morning. Are we able to see a picture bigger than our own bigotry and our own issues and our own druthers and our own opinions? Are we able to see a God who doesn't think exactly the way we do and might want to modify the way we think? Is there a higher picture involved? I don't know anybody who studied the Bible more in his or her adult life than me, and the more I study it, the less clarity I have about it because it's way deeper, as Kim was singing, and higher than I can imagine. The closer I get to God, and I have really cultivated a closer relationship with God over decades now, and the closer I get to Him, and I am getting closer to the Lord, the less I fully understand Him. The less I could tell you what He's thinking. I once did a sermon in seminary in grad school about what God's thinking about such and such, and one of my professors raked me over the coals. "You have no idea what God's thinking." But of course, being in my 20s, I thought I knew everything about what God was thinking. And we often don't. God has a bigger plan. That's why He's God. And I'm not saying that horrible things like stomach cancer and plagues and child pornography are caused by God. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that God has a way bigger picture than we do. And we often don't understand the things that He's doing. And are we willing to go deeper? Are we willing to go higher? Are we willing to go those places where He asks us to go so that we can grow? You know what makes me happy? One thing that makes me happy is the fact that I cringe when I hear my sermons from 3 years ago. And that's always been the case. And I hope it will always be the case. Because I want to continue to grow, mature, and I hope that I won't think the same thing I did 3 years ago. Who here wants to think differently in 5 years than you do now? And better, and bigger, and understand things, and be writing a better narrative about your life? So, the author of Jonah, and the book's author, by the way, is not Jonah, because Jonah is mentioned in the third person. And Jonah would never write this about himself. I don't think it's just really, really bad. Somebody who definitely wants to point out the flaws of Jonah. And whoever wrote this purposely left the ending out, just like in that movie, The Photograph. What are we going to do with it? The ball is in our court. You're playing tennis, and they've knocked the ball into your court. Are you going to swing at it or what? Are you just going to stand there? Are you going to give it a shot? What are you going to do with the game that the Lord has given you, with the hand He's dealt you? We're going to complain and sulk about the cards we have, or are we going to move forward and do something with them? Jonah is a big deal. It's a page and a half in most of your Bibles. Who here has been to the Sistine Chapel in Italy? Anybody here been to the Sistine Chapel? Rosalie's been here. Anybody else? You been there? The Sistine Chapel is Michelangelo's masterpiece in the ceiling. You have God creating Adam, with that finger coming out, and Adam's sitting there like this. And Wendy was upset that Adam was naked, but that's a whole other thing. But It's true. And there's a lot of naked stuff there. It's just really weird. But anyways, you're looking at these pictures, and there's professional shushers going around. There's people who work there who just shush people. Shh, shh, shh. Imagine doing that for 8 hours a day. They're just shushing people. There's all this stuff on the ceiling. You know, one of the 2 or 3 biggest characters on the ceiling is Jonah. Jonah is massive, absolutely massive on the ceiling. Why? Because it's the story of us. It's the story of how not to react to the circumstances we have. It's that story of how not to say no to God. It's the story of how we fail in life and how we don't have to fail. We don't have to be like Jonah. And we know that at the end of the story. Life is Jonah 2.0. The ball is in our court. This is my main point today. You have no control over your circumstances, but you are the author of your narrative. If you interpret the things that happen to you through the eyes of faith, you will draw more good things. I've got some bad news for you. Sulking draws more misfortune. It really does. Sulking draws more misfortune. And faith draws more blessing. And I'm not saying to be in denial about the bad things that have happened to you, because they're very real. Red ink in your checkbook is very real. Letters from the IRS are very real. That diagnosis that comes to you can be very real from the doctor. If your marriage didn't work out, that's very real and very painful. If a loved one dies, that's very real. But how do we respond to that? Do we respond to that with sulking or with faith? How do we write a narrative that draws more of God's blessings and less of his cursings? Number 2, sulking is not attractive with kids and less so with adults. If you've been married, you've tried it. I've tried it with Wendy. It does not work very well. Just sulking, sulking, sulking. And it doesn't ever get us what we want for it to get us. And some of us, isn't it amazing how kids just have a natural way to screw up their face and sulk? You'll see it at Walmart. You'll see it at McDonald's. You'll see it. The kid just goes. I saw a kid. Wendy and I saw a 2-year-old go into major sulk at the grocery store last week and started rolling around on the floor. Oh, the joy of 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. This was a bodily sulk. I am fed up with you, Mom, and I'm fed up with this place, and I'm fed up with what's happening, and that's the way it is. Sulking is not attractive with kids, less so with adults, and God doesn't really much like it either. We can lament, but let's not turn it into a sulk, because sulking doesn't get us what we want it to get. And Jonah is pretty much the master of sulking. Do we really hate the sin and love the sinner? I've seen so many Christians say, well, I love the sinner, I just hate the sin. Oh, and that sounds so logical. But look what happens when the Ninevites stop sinning. Jonah still hates them. Jonah still hates them. I think we often say that as Christians to cover for the fact that we really can't stand them. We really can't. There's a lot of people who have behaviors we just can't stand, and we just would assume that they go down like Nineveh. And logically we say, oh no, that's not true. But do the people for whom you hate the sin know that you love them? Do they sense any love from you? Do they sense love from you more than your hatred for the sin? Probably not. How can we love more? And yes, we can hate sin, but I think it's also important to hate the sin in our own lives. I often hate the sin in other people's lives way more than the sin in my life. And it's easy to do. And Jonah, probably if you had asked him before he ever got called to God, do you love the Ninevites? Oh yes, but I just hate their sin. But it turns out you removed the sin and he still hated them. There was no love for them at all because he was frustrated that they turned around and frustrated that they were rescued. That's a whole other sermon. Grace is not karma. Grace is way better than karma. Karma is what goes around, comes around. You reap what you sow. If you do bad things, you got bad things coming to you. Most religions operate on karma of some form or another. And there is no grace in the system. Everything you do counts on the final, and that's it. That's it. That's all there is to it. And whatever your balance is at the end, that's what you end up with. And you go forward based on that. Reincarnation's based on that. Purgatory is based on that. All kinds of theologies we come up with to justify karma. You've got to work off your karma. That's why you need purgatory. You've got to work off your karma. That's why you need to keep getting reborn, because there is no forgiveness. There is no grace. All there is what goes around comes around. And that's what Jonah wants for Nineveh, but he wants grace for himself. We often want grace for ourselves and karma for others. Wouldn't it be cool if we wanted grace for everyone and also for us? Who thinks Christians would be a little bit more attractive if that were the case? We'd be way more attractive. Mark back here in the back, follow him online sometime. He is so good at this with people he disagrees with. There's a sense to which he cares about them. It comes across that way, and they tell him that, which I think is really cool. How can we be people who don't just receive grace, but give grace? Is there any better compliment you could ever tell someone than, she was such a gracious person? Just grace-filled for other people. I think it's the highest compliment you could ever get. Because that shows that you're above the pettiness. And you understand that people are flawed. And you do the best you can with them. And you work with them. And you help them write a better narrative. And you do what you can and leave the rest up to God. I am so glad that we have a faith from Jesus of grace and not karma. I'm so glad I don't get what's coming to me. And I would love to see the rest of the world too receive grace. That's why we evangelize. That's why we go on mission trips, so people can receive grace, not so that they get karma. That's not the point. Dallas Willard, arguably the smartest Christian in California before he passed away recently. So smart, I can't read his books. I try. I go up to my axles in mud. It's so deep and so, I'm not smart enough. But this quote I love. The measure of spiritual maturity, he was asked, it's this, he's answered. How do you respond when you don't get your way? Jonah is an anti-example of this. How do you respond when you don't get your way? I think that's the measure of a man or a measure of a woman, is how we respond when we don't get our way. Because guess what? In life, we're not always going to get our way. I've responded really badly a couple of times in my life when I didn't get my way. And looking back, I'm glad I didn't get my way, because God had a bigger plan. This was from Brian Gigi from our men's group. He's in Texas. We have a men's group that's coast to coast, Monday mornings. All you men are welcome to join us. And we do a Bible study on Monday mornings. And this last Monday, he just gave us this fantastic thing, which he got from someone else who got it from someone else. It's probably fourth hand by the time it came to me. 4 points. 1, life is harsh. You're going to have bad consequences. Some things will go wrong. One of the worst things you can tell someone is, if you become a Christian, everything will be nice and easy. Who thinks Jesus was a pretty good, faith-filled person? He had a 3-year career and got executed. I mean, there's no guarantee of being right in God's will and having no trouble. Someone once wrote it, if you want to follow Jesus real closely, make sure you look good on wood, because you could end up there real fast. It's not easy. It's not an easy path. Number 2, I'm not the center of what's happening. That's Jonah's problem. Jonah was a narcissist. It's all about him. And he never really learned his lesson the whole time, as far as we know. God is using me to affect the rest, not the other way around. God is not using the world to fix my life. God is using me to help fix the world. I'm a part of the solution. The world is not here to entertain and feed me. I'm here to help the world. And I'm part of the solution. I'm not the center of everything. It's bigger than me. It's more about us. Number 3, I can't control it. Control is overrated, and it's an illusion. You can't control your circumstances. You can control some of them. You can have a good education so you get a good career. You can be faithful to your spouse so that your marriage lasts longer. You can control some of that, but very little. So much of our lives just comes out of nowhere. If you would have told my wife growing up in Southeast Asia that she'd end up in California in a little church like this, hanging out with me, she would not have believed that that was where she was headed. Our lives are very much an adventure. And are we willing to write an adventure story with faith, or are we going to just sulk about what's happening to us? And the last one, this life will end. Work backwards with this in mind. What do you want said at your eulogy? I've been to more funerals than all y'all because of what I do. Probably 10 times as many funerals as all of you, maybe more. When I was at Grace Lutheran Church, we used to do 3 funerals a Saturday. We just left the flowers up. There were so many older people. Pastor Mel and I did 3 funerals in a row most Saturdays. You know what I've never heard at a funeral? He was really good at getting a promotion. He made a lot of money. He was really popular in high school. They don't say stuff like that. What do they say? He was gracious. She was giving. He was generous. All the things that Jonah wasn't. I could get hit by a bus tomorrow, but there's a really good chance that I could do at least half of your funeral sermons. And I would love to say some nice things about you, and I know really nice things about most of you. But you get to write your eulogy by how you live your life. And we have to work with the end in mind. How do we want to be remembered? What do we want our legacy to be? Do we want our legacy to be one of graciousness? It's so hard for me sometimes because I have done funerals for some really nasty people. And you can always tell if it's a nasty person because here's how I start the funeral. There was never a day when God stopped loving Bob. Because that's always true. That's always true. So you can start with the truth and go from there. Keep the message really, really short. But I don't want to do any Bob sermons with you guys unless your name is Bob. I don't want to do that. I want to bring out that graciousness and that love and all of the best that the Lord has to give us. So at the end of the book of Jonah, we're left at a crossroads. He's facing misfortune. You're going to face misfortune. How do we respond? The road to the left, resentment, low-grade hostility, and sulking. And nobody wants to be around those people. Or the right, gratitude, curiosity. I wonder what God's doing right now. How can I figure this out? How can I ask the Lord what's going on here? Because I don't understand it. Curiosity. This is a big one. What, not why. When we don't understand something, it's above our understanding. Why, oh Lord, why? Some stuff we just don't understand, and we never will. Some stuff's just way too complicated. But you know one of the best questions we can ask of the Lord? Not why, but what do I do now? Given what's happened to me now, what do I make of it? What if Jonah had asked that? Well, Lord, they turned around. So what should I do now? How can I be useful? How should I interpret this? He could have written his own book at this point. For all we know, he actually did turn around at that point and then wrote this book. That's a whole other speculation thing, but who knows? But asking God what, not why. What do I do? Given what's happened, what do I do now? Who thinks God has an answer for that? I think so. It might be strange. It might be odd. Another thing is, what lessons can I learn from this? Your biggest failures, my biggest failures, have been our biggest teachers. What can I learn from what went wrong? What can I learn from what happened here? Well, I'd like to close this, but there is no closing to this sermon, so I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. The ball is in your court. It's up to you. Let's stand and let's pray.